Thank you, Michael. Is that loud and clear? It's great to be here tonight. Thank you for the organisers today for inviting me. It's quite a... We're going through this, or we're going to go through this? Should be on. Okay. Is that on? How's that? It's an honour to have the opportunity to share with you. I know this is a very sensitive topic. Vaccinations, and so sensitive that today one of the things we'll be talking about is freedom of speech in Australia, or perhaps the lack of it. This topic is so sensitive that if I was from, say, overseas, or any of the speakers here today were out from outside the country, they would be banned from coming to this country to share with you today. So I guess it doesn't matter what our position is on vaccines. I think we'll all agree that we're meant to live in a democratic society and we're meant to have freedom of speech. So whether you're pro-vaxxer, anti-vaxxer, ex-vaxxer, over-vaxxer, whatever it is, we should all acknowledge that our freedom of speech in this country is under attack. And as a citizen of this country, and a passionate citizen, that raises some concerns for me. Albert Einstein had some wise words. The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything. And that's really one of the compelling reasons I decided to, I guess, risk my career. I've been a motivational speaker for 20 years. I built many companies, and to voice your concern about this industry creates a lot of powerful enemies, and that's why a lot of people remain silent. And how I ended up talking on these topics was because in 2013, I was one of the founders of the Australian National Review, which was a newspaper designed to highlight the lies and expose mainstream media for their propaganda. Not on this issue. I was unaware of this vaccine issue at the time, but on many other issues, and just to have a newspaper out there that's a force for good, that can create critical debate in this country and highlight certain issues. And out of my involvement at the same time, I launched a political party, and if you ever wonder why there's very few entrepreneurs in politics in Australia, if you go into politics, you're an entrepreneur, you get severely attacked. So then I learnt about mainstream media and how they can use character assassination to really go after people that want to highlight certain things that the powers that be don't want highlighted. But what started to happen was there was many doctors and scientists, and a lot of credible information was being sent to A&R, pleading with the editors of A&R to run and highlight these stories on the vaccine debate. And at that time, I was effectively a pro-vaxxer, but I was a pro-vaxxer because, like most people, I was simply unaware and uneducated about the vaccine debate. So I was only a pro-vaxxer by default because that's the way we're raised and we're conditioned in our society through social conditioning, is whatever the government says. Generally, that's the rules. They set the rules. It's the way it is, and you'd always trust your doctor. Makes sense? Like many people do. So they have no reason to ask pertinent questions. And today in this summit is really simply about asking questions. And I would propose that if the industry has nothing to hide, then asking questions, and very simple questions such as, what is in a vaccine, should not alarm, should not concern, or should not bring condemnation upon anyone. But if we're seen in this country, only recently with a certain billboard in Perth, a simple question asking, what is in a vaccine? Apparently, that's conspiracy garbage to ask that question, according to some of the health ministers in WA. It's quite a nasty and insidious billboard for daring asking a simple question. The debate has become so ridiculous. Those that oppose, those that have any concerns, valid concerns to say, maybe there's an issue with the safety of vaccines, and maybe there's an issue with the effectiveness of vaccines. They're fair enough questions. And let me ask you a question here. Raise your hand if you feel that you, as a citizen of this country or wherever you're from, that you have the right to ask simple questions. And because you ask those questions, does that mean you wear a tinfoil hat? I don't see any tinfoil hats in this room. They said, Jamie, you're going to speak at a vaccine conference, they're all nutters. They're crazy. Which of course is not true. I've met many highly educated people, and most people that I've seen at conferences like this above average education, not academic education necessarily, but educated about the facts. And educated people seem to be a threat to certain elements of society. So first of all, before I get into what I want to quickly talk about in our brief time today, I want to commend and acknowledge and show my respect to each and every one of you, because to be in this room you have to be an open-minded person and a critical thinker. And that's what this country needs, and that's what this world needs. I see no need for more sheep. Is it true? We need critical thinkers, and you're entitled to ask questions, whatever your views are, whether you're pro, anti-vax. I think that's just designed to divide. If you look at the art of war, divide to conquer. You see in our political system 2 major political parties, whether it's a Republican or Democrats in America, Liberal, Labor here. Do you believe in climate change? Do you not? Are you pro or anti-vax? It's all designed to divide and cause you to get caught up in a debate why they go ahead and selling billions of dollars worth of faulty and dangerous products behind your back. Just keep you guys distracted. Does it make sense? So I also want to acknowledge people in this room that have suffered already, whether you've suffered personally from the damages of vaccines, or I know many parents here that have suffered from having a vaccine-injured child, because you should be acknowledged at the pain, the stress and the grief that you've had to go through, and that you have to go through often in silence. And again, a show of hands, raise your hand if you have been or have a child or know someone that has been vaccine injured. Raise of hands. Okay, a large majority of people in this room. So for those who are watching live stream, and there's any politicians in this country or health ministers that actually are open-minded enough to consider this debate, accordingly, you people don't exist. Does it make sense? If you're vaccine injured or your children have been vaccine injured, you don't exist. And you should suffer in silence, and you're not entitled to a voice. You're collateral damage. And I think that's grossly unfair, and I would say to the politicians of this country, I'd say to health ministers of this country, please have a heart. Because you can only silence people for so long. And I would say, and I'm fortunate, I'd say, I look forward to having kids. I haven't had kids yet, but I'm just so glad that I discovered and researched about vaccines before I made that decision to vaccinate my children without knowing that. At least now I have a choice to make informed consent. And I highly disagree in this country with our no jab, no pay, and our no jab, no play policies. I disagree with them for several reasons. One, because it's coercion. We should have the choice of whether we vaccinate our children and what level of vaccination that we put into our children. Who would agree with that we should have that choice? And there's powers to be, notably the pharmaceutical industry already in America is trying to make that mandatory, and they will try here. So you have to fight. I can tell you now, if I had a vaccine-injured child, they wouldn't silence me. Does it make sense? And my encouragement to those of you in this room or watching from around this country, around this world, is don't remain silent. You need to get angry. You need to take a stand. If you look at Bernie Sanders, in America, who almost become the Democrat nominee in the last election over there, he reached a lot of people purely by being angry and highlighting the anger of people. And I'm not advocating you should be an angry person, but when something this challenging happens to you, you have every right to be angry, because your health ministers in this country have said to you and continue to say to you that vaccines are 100% safe and they're 100% effective, and any adverse reactions are extremely rare. I call bullshit. Who else calls bullshit? And you have every right to call bullshit, because it is. Regardless whether you're pro-vax or anti-vaxxer, that is bullshit. And I've said, even on Twitter, and I'll say this again because you can even say Jamie McIntyre, you said this if you want. I say this to health ministers. You should go and check with your lawyers before you say those words ever again. Because your words are being noted and are being recorded, and they will be used against you in a court of law in the future. And they want to use... And that court of law may be when you're no longer in office and the government won't be there to protect you. But if you're going to state publicly in this country things that are knowingly You can't say inadvertently we made errors. You knowingly, this industry knowingly knows what it's doing. It's premeditated to silence people and to silence victims of vaccines. Now, the government will argue, because many of these politicians are not that educated. You know, I've met many of them, and no disrespect to some of them, but there's many of them are not the most intelligent people in our country, unfortunately. But they're just too busy, they're not researched. So their belief is that vaccines eradicate most diseases, like many people think, and therefore just be quiet about it, Jamie. Just don't talk about it. Just pretend, they like to pretend that vaccine injury don't exist. It's your collateral damage. So I would say to these people, even if that was true, even if vaccines are this amazing medical breakthrough that eradicated all these diseases all on their own, and however, there's going to be some collateral damage, even then, it's not ethically right or morally right to hide that from parents before they vaccinate their child, that they're playing Russian roulette by vaccinating their child. Who would agree with that? It is certainly not right. So they should still come clean and go, we believe that vaccines overall for the greater public benefit, but some of you are going to be unlucky and some of your kids are going to be vaxxed to death. Now, of course, they're not going to say that, is it true? Because they know that very few people would rush to be vaccinated. So they're going to lie to you, is that true? But the other challenge with that argument is this. Did vaccines, are they the main contributor to the eradication of diseases on the planet? Yes or no? No. Speaking to you, most of you would know that that's not necessarily the case. So we now have two moral and ethical issues. One, would you be prepared to suffer collateral damage for the greater good? Even then, it would be very hard to enforce a policy. But when there's enough evidence to highlight that, in fact, it may not even be for the greater good, and that's the idea of many of these myths as they propagate, such as herd immunity, that you should be vaccinated because herd immunity. They put the guilt and shame upon you, and that's how they sell, by the way. Folks, the vaccine industry and their sales have grown since 2002. They were selling just a measly $5 billion a year. They've grown to almost $50 billion today, and they're expected to hit $60 billion by 2020. So this myth that vaccine manufacturers don't do this for money and for profit is a lie. Some of these vaccine companies are making as much as 40% margin, up to 40% margin on vaccines. Their drug patents are running out. This is the new golden child of vaccines, and they know how to sell, folks. They have the budgets. They spend more on marketing to have you buy them than they do on research. And you are human guinea pigs, which I'm sure most of you already figured that out. To sell $50 billion, they have the money to silence a lot of people, and they are attempting to do that. They do not like debates like this about this industry because it could cause a loss of sales. Not only that, one day they are so liable for massive compensation payouts. However, as you know, in America, the American government protects them. So if you've got an industry that has no downside, has only upsides, and they can just sell without any proven proof of a product, then of course, is it a conspiracy theory that large multinational companies, and particular vaccine companies, do they not conspire on a yearly, a monthly, a weekly and daily basis to figure out how to drive up sales? Yes or no? That's not a conspiracy theory. We know they conspire to do that. That's business. They report to shareholders and they report to a board. And if you're a shareholder of a vaccine company, you'd want the share price to go up. Is that true? That's how the world works. This is no conspiracy theory, folks. To suggest it is just nonsense. And that's the challenge that we had. But wrapping up with even the herd immunity, you know, originally when they come out with the idea of herd immunity, you know, natural herd immunity, yes, exists. Vaccine-induced herd immunity has never been proven. But they don't have to prove things in the medical world. They just have to latch onto a theory, and that's enough to create a multi-billion-dollar market to sell drugs. Whether it's sunscreens or whatever, it's not the only industry that figured out how to manufacture and sell drugs without proven behind it. Makes sense? So The idea of herd immunity alone, it used to they say 30% was enough to create that. Now they'll tell you in Australia it's all the way up to 95%, but it's absurd. Most of us, I got about a couple of vaccines in 1972. My parents would have probably had one, I think my dad said, for polio. So most of us aren't vaccinated. So the idea of herd immunity, what they're chasing for, is absurd. It will never be achieved, but the cost of that is immense, and you're bearing the cost of that. So in wrapping up very quickly, here's what I want to suggest. I still have 5 minutes? I have 10. Sorry, you told me I was going for 5. I thought that wrapped up. Okay, I can slow down a little bit. Do you know on average women speak 13,000 words a day, us men only 4,000? So let me highlight some of the other myths. Apart from all the things that we should certainly touch on, I mentioned about the record profits, the herd immunity, the eradication of diseases. You know, people say, Jamie, well, what gives you a right to speak on this topic? You're not a doctor. And it's true, I'm not a doctor, and no offence to doctors, but just being a doctor doesn't necessarily mean you know a lot about vaccinations. Is that true? Unless you're a doctor that makes some effort into learning that. But the reason I got involved in this industry was because of doctors and scientists are sending in information, and some of them didn't want to go public because of obvious reasons. You only have to see what's happened to many doctors that have. And so I really admire the courage of doctors that speak out about it. I also have spoken to many doctors that publicly won't speak about it or even to their patients. But you'll notice many doctors aren't vaccinating their children, or if they do, only in a very low amount in comparison to the vaccine schedules. I do find it ironic, though, about how the media will sell you. You know, they use fear. Is it true? And they're very clever. I mean, if you had $50 billion in sales, you could afford the best PR people in the country. You could afford to lobby to the politicians. And then normally mainstream media, the media is meant to be the scrutinizer that exposes industries. But just look like with asbestos. Remember, for years, we were told asbestos was safe. They put it in our buildings, etc. But after enough decades, eventually enough whistleblowers and enough noise is made that the government acknowledges, hang on, asbestos is not healthy, it's dangerous, and then they'll have it removed. So there is hope with this debate that if you make enough noise for long enough, you can create a tipping point, and then something can be done about this. I would like to see in this country freedom of speech laws changed to actually protect freedom of speech. If people want to come from overseas speakers and speak on this topic, they should not be denied visas. They're not a public health risk. The health ministers and the vaccine schedule in this country is a public health risk. Does it make sense? If the industry has nothing to hide, I challenge the industry and I challenge journalists that work for a mainstream media. If you don't think there's a conspiracy to hide this sort of stuff, if you're a journalist in this country, write a story. Write a story on the legitimate concerns that parents have in this country and doctors and others on the safety and effectiveness of vaccines. Write that story. And if you don't think there's a conspiracy to silence it, then try and get it printed by Murdoch Papers or Fairfax Media. And you will find that, one, it won't get printed. If it does get printed, the editor will do some clever editing to the title of that. This industry is so outrageously pathetic and deserves to be exposed. I'll give you an example. And Rupert Murdoch has a lot to answer for, the Murdoch press, because the no jab, no pay policy was not introduced. I don't recall having a referendum on it. Did you vote for it in the last election or election before that? If this is a democratic country, let us have a vote on that. That was not introduced by the people of this country. It was introduced by Murdoch. And it was introduced because Murdoch has financial conflicts of interest and financial ties, not just here in Australia, but they push it in England and other parts of the world. And I don't know, I don't think in a democratic country, one individual should be setting what our vaccination schedules are. And Mr. Murdoch is not even a doctor, so he should mind his own business and butt out, because too many. And only if we had politicians in this country be willing to say that to Mr. Murdoch. But they're too gutless. because he has unhealthy power and influence over many politicians in this country. So I implore politicians in this country, get some courage. Display some courage to the parents that have to suffer from vaccine-injured children, the courage they have to go through. I want politicians in this country to have courage. There's enough people out there that will support you. If you're willing to come out and highlight that the constituents, your voters are highlighting, there is concerns, there's an issue here. Does it make sense? They have to have courage. So implore them, continue to send them information, make enough noise that they eventually can't remain silent. They will come out when they believe it's a political issue and there's enough people that will support them. The Murdoch papers and Fairfax papers have you believe that most people are pro-vaxxers and a large percentage of the population is, but they'll try and make it out that if anyone opposes them or is concerned about them, that you're a very small minority, which isn't the case. I'm yet to meet an intelligent person that's also educated on the issue that does not have some concerns about the effectiveness or safety of vaccines. Does it make sense? Yet to meet. Now, some people might go, well, I know someone intelligent and they're extremely pro-vax. I suggest they're pro-vax because they have to admit they're not highly educated on the topic. Is that true? I too was once pro-vax, but simply because I was uneducated. I've never met anyone that's educated in detail that has come back and go, no, everything's fine. There's nothing there to worry about. The 50 billion in sales, it's growing because all of a sudden these diseases are taking off again. Here's an interesting thing that I find unusual. Is this. In 1972, when I was vaccinated, most of us kids back then got measles and got chicken pox. And today, if there's a measles outbreak at school, it makes the national Australian newspaper. It'll make your city Daily Telegraph in Sydney. When I got measles, it didn't even make the local student newspaper, let alone the Glenelg Examiner where I was born, and certainly didn't make the Daily Telegraph, and no hope of making the front page of Australian, but I might now because I'm speaking about a topic they don't like. Making sense? Has measles since 1972 all changed and morphed into a super, much more deadly outbreak of disease, yes or no? It's the same measles back then, but you know, I have natural immunity to measles and chicken pox, and it was actually, parents were excited. Better get it over and done with, and then every other siblings catch it, and we're all immune. Get on with life, is that true? Yes. God help the young kids today that don't have that natural immunity. So these are issues. So why is that such an issue? Because fear sells, folks, and when you have an industry that knows how to make profit, as the vaccine manufacturers do, and very healthy profits, and this is their new golden boy because drug patents are running out. That means generic drugs, they can't make as much money from drugs, but they can now make money from vaccines, okay? If you have vaccine manufacturers, what you're meant to have is a regulator that's in between, appointed by the government that's independent, that will oversee them and ensure the safety and effectiveness of their product, that they don't sell you dodgy, faulty products. True? Imagine in this country what happens all the time. If there's the slightest issue with car manufacturers, if the airbag or something like that, they will recall hundreds of thousands of cars at great cost to manufacturers for something that may inadvertently go wrong and could kill someone. But in the vaccine industry, there is no independent regulator that is overseeing and protecting you from that. The government is also meant to be protecting you. The politicians are meant to be listening to you as voters and protecting you, not protecting bottom line profits of vaccine manufacturers. But they're too scared to raise their concerns because they'll be destroyed by the other entity that's meant to keep businesses honest and keep governments honest, is the media. But if the vaccine industry can influence, coerce, or have significant control over the media, then there's no checks there. So that is how we have a situation today, where you have an industry that should have been exposed a very long time ago, that is causing untold death in many cases, untold misery to so many people, that's going unchecked. It's the only industry I know where its products can maim and kill individuals, yet they're able to have such good PR spin that they can turn that around and use that as the very reason why you should buy more of their products. Does it make sense? I'll give you a quick example before wrapping up. Daily Telegraph, Murdoch papers, they have some beautiful journalists that really deeply care about you and the truth. Jane Hanson's one that comes to mind. And I wish and pray that people like this simply can't develop some heart. Because here's a story. Gold Coast Hospital, less than a year ago, I believe. Young mum, pregnant. Pregnant mums are now told to be vaccinated, even though they were told not that many years ago that pregnant mums shouldn't be vaccinated. Vaccinated, become very sick instantly, went home, went back to the hospital, becoming increasingly sick over a matter of days. 10 days later, this mother died. Now, what should happen if the media was doing its job and the media had a heart, and I say that out to any journalists out there that have issues with this industry. If they had a heart, there should have been a warning, a headline, an article come out going, there should be an urgent investigation into vaccines for pregnant women because one young mum just died from vaccination. But guess what the article was that come out? It wasn't that. The article come out saying, mother dies, most likely caught the disease from unvaccinated child. Not only did this family, the survivor, the husband and the surviving children of this family have to deal with their mother having died from vaccination. They had to deal with being attacked, intimidated, bullied and harassed on social media, on Facebook, by people out there, the internet trolls who don't have a heart, saying, you know, your mother deserved to die because she didn't vaccinate one of her children. You deserve what you've got. Now, is this what Australia is coming to? It's becoming so heartless that that's who the people in this country are becoming to, and that's occurring because the media supports that, because politicians are too gutless to take a stand and speak for the truth, and we have an out-of-control industry that's making $50 billion a year in sales and not going to stop if only a few of us are making some noise. We'll only stop when we unite and enough of us stand up and get really angry and make enough noise to say enough is enough. This industry needs a royal commission just like the banks are just facing right now, and you should not stop. And you should not stop until you get your royal commission into the vaccine industry and the vaccine mandates in this country. It's been nice chatting to you today.